Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. The Operator. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Colombian hillside as Master Sergeant Blake Willard adjusted his scope for the third time in 20 minutes. 3 days he'd been lying in this godforsaken nest, watching the compound through his Barrett M82A1. His spotter, Corporal Martinez, lay beside him with binoculars trained on the same target. Movement at the south entrance, Martinez whispered. Blake shifted slightly, his crosshairs finding Lorenzo Bentley, not the drug lord's real name, but the one intelligence had provided. The man was responsible for trafficking routes that had claimed hundreds of American lives through fentanyl. Blake had seen the casualty reports. Kids, mostly. Teenagers who thought they were taking something harmless. Blake Willard wasn't your typical soldier. At 34, he'd spent 12 years in special operations, the last 6 as a sniper with Delta Force. He'd grown up in small-town Georgia, raised by his grandfather after his parents died in a car crash when he was 8. His grandfather, a Korea War veteran, had taught him discipline, honor, and the weight of taking a life. You don't pull that trigger unless you're saving more lives than you're taking, the old man had said. Blake carried those words into every mission. Back home in Savannah, he had everything that mattered. His daughter Emma, age 7, with her mother's blonde hair and his own steel-gray eyes. Emma was his world, the reason he'd been considering leaving the service next year. He missed too many birthdays, too many school plays, too many bedtime stories. His ex-wife Melanie Tate had remarried 6 months ago to some guy named Kerry Donovan. Blake had been deployed during the wedding, which suited him fine. Melanie had made her choice when she filed for divorce 2 years ago, claiming she couldn't handle the uncertainty, the deployments, the fear. Blake understood, even if it broke his heart. "Sir, you seeing this?" Martinez's voice carried an edge. Blake looked through his scope. 3 black SUVs were approaching the compound. This wasn't part of the intelligence briefing. The operation was supposed to be clean, 1 shot, 1 kill, extract before anyone knew what happened. "Command, this is Overwatch. We have unexpected visitors at the target location." "Overwatch, Command. Maintain position. New intelligence suggests a meeting of multiple high-value targets." Blake felt his pulse steady. This could be bigger than they planned. He watched as men in expensive suits emerged from the vehicles. Through his scope, he could make out faces that matched photographs from briefings about the entire trafficking network. "It's Christmas morning," he muttered to Martinez. Hours passed. Blake remained motionless, a skill perfected through countless operations. At 1,400 hours, the targets finally gathered on the compound's main terrace. Lorenzo Bentley stood at the center, gesturing animatedly. Blake could take them all out with careful positioning and quick follow-up shots. He was lining up his first shot when the satellite phone in Martinez's pack buzzed. "Sir, it's priority channel." Blake kept his eye on the scope. "Take it," Martinez answered quietly. Then his face went pale. "Sir, it's for you. Emergency contact from home." Blake's blood went cold. Emergency contact meant family. "Emma." He took the phone without moving from position. "Willard." "Mr. Willard? This is Janet Murphy at Georgia Regional Medical Center. I'm calling about your daughter, Emma Willard." The world stopped. Blake's finger remained steady on the trigger, but his heart hammered against his ribs. "What happened?" "She's in our burn unit, sir. She has third-degree burns covering 30% of her back. She's stable, but—" The nurse paused. "Sir, she keeps asking for you. She says her mommy's friend hurt her. Put her on." Blake heard shuffling, then the small, broken voice that was his entire world. "Daddy." "I'm here, baby girl. Daddy's here." Emma's sobs came through the static. "He hurt me, Daddy. Kerry hurt me real bad. He had this metal thing from the fireplace. He said he was making me his property. Mommy was at work, and—" "Emma, baby, listen to Daddy. You're safe now. The doctors are taking care of you, okay? It hurts so bad, Daddy. When are you coming home?" Blake closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them to see Lorenzo Bentley laughing at something one of his associates had said. "Soon, sweetheart. Daddy's coming home very soon." Martinez had been listening. When Blake handed back the phone, His spotter's expression was grim. "Take the shot, sir. I'll handle comms." Blake looked through his scope one final time. The crosshairs centered on Lorenzo Bentley's head. These men destroyed families, destroyed children, destroyed futures. But right now, there was only one monster that mattered, and he wasn't in Colombia. "Command, this is Overwatch. Mission abort. Family emergency. Overwatch, negative. You have multiple high-value targets in position. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." Blake began breaking down his rifle. "Martinez, get us transport to the LZ." "Sir, command isn't going to like this." Blake's voice was ice. "Martinez, you have children?" "Yes, sir. 2 daughters." "Then you understand." Blake finished packing his gear and looked at his spotter. "Besides, I just remembered something my grandfather told me about hunting, the most dangerous game." "What's that, sir?" "Sometimes you have to let the small predators go to hunt the apex ones." Blake slung his rifle over his shoulder and started moving toward the extraction point. "And Martinez?" "Yes, sir. Contact my friend, Captain Dennis O'Connor, at Fort Bragg. Tell him Blake Willard needs a favor, and it involves showing someone the difference between a brand and an obituary." Chapter 2. The Monster. Carrie Donovan stood in the bathroom mirror of the modest 2-story house in Savannah suburbs, admiring his handiwork on his forearms. Burn marks he'd inflicted on himself to match his story. At 28, Carrie had perfected the art of manipulation. Average height, brown hair, unremarkable features that helped him blend in. But behind his mundane exterior lived something much darker. He'd grown up in foster care after his mother abandoned him at age 5. 15 different homes, each one teaching him new lessons about power, control, and how to hide his true nature. The scars on his back told stories of cigarette burns from foster father number 3. The crooked pinky on his left hand spoke of foster mother number 7's creative punishments. Each injury had twisted him further until pain became his language of love. Melanie Tate had been perfect, a lonely divorced woman, vulnerable and desperate for stability. Carrie had played the role of the caring boyfriend masterfully. He'd waited 8 months before the first incident with Emma, a playful grab that left bruises on her arm. When Melanie questioned him, he'd broken down in fake tears, talking about his own childhood trauma, promising it would never happen again. But it did happen again, and again, always when Melanie was at work, always with threats that kept Emma silent. The 7-year-old had learned to flinch when he entered a room, learned to make herself invisible. That fear in her eyes had become addictive to Carrie. Yesterday, he'd crossed a line even he hadn't planned to cross. Melanie had left for her nursing shift at the hospital. Emma was watching cartoons in the living room when Carrie, already 3 beers deep, decided it was time to make his mark permanent. He'd heated the fireplace poker until it glowed red hot. Emma had tried to run when she saw him coming, but the front door was locked. He'd made sure of that months ago. He'd caught her at the bottom of the stairs. "Hold still, you little brat. This is what happens to things that belong to me." Emma's screams had been music to his ears. The smell of burning flesh had been intoxicating. He'd pressed the poker against her back in the shape of his initials, CD, watching her small body convulse in agony. But then Mrs. Henderson next door had started banging on the door, shouting that she was calling 911. Carrie had panicked, dunking Emma in a cold bath to stop the burning, then crafting his story. When the paramedics arrived, Carrie was the concerned stepfather, tears in his eyes, burns on his own arms from trying to save her when she accidentally fell against the fireplace. Emma was unconscious from shock and pain. At the hospital, Melanie had believed his story initially. The burns on his arms sold it. But Emma had woken up screaming his name, telling anyone who would listen what really happened. The police had questioned him for 6 hours before releasing him. Emma's word against his, and he'd layered his lies thick. Now, 24 hours later, Carrie was planning his next move. Emma was in the hospital, probably for weeks. Melanie was staying there around the clock. He had time to disappear if he wanted to, but something kept him here. Pride, maybe, or the knowledge that running would be admitting guilt. Besides, what could her father really do? Blake Willard was halfway around the world, playing soldier. Even if he came home, what then? Carrie had covered his tracks. It would be his word against a traumatized child's, and he'd already poisoned Melanie against her ex-husband for months. He was never there for Emma, Carrie had whispered to Melanie during their pillow talks. What kind of father abandons his daughter for the military? She needs stability, not a part-time parent who could die in some foreign country. Carrie smiled at his reflection. Blake Willard was a ghost in Emma's life, and ghosts didn't frighten him. He dealt with worse than some soldier boy playing hero. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Carrie walked downstairs and peered through the peephole to see two men in suits. Police, probably, with more questions. He'd stick to his story. He was good at stories. He opened the door with his practiced, concerned expression. Officers, Mr. Donovan? I'm Detective Tom Townsend. This is Detective Albar. We need to ask you some follow-up questions about yesterday's incident. Of course, anything to help. I've been so worried about Emma. Is she? She's stable, Detective Townsend said curtly. Mind if we come in? Carrie stepped aside, noting how both detectives' eyes swept the room. They were looking for evidence, but he'd cleaned up thoroughly. The poker was back in its stand, scrubbed clean. The only signs of trauma were the staged, broken picture frame and the accidental scorch mark on the hardwood floor. Mr. Donovan, we've spoken with Emma several times now, Detective Barr said, pulling out a notebook. Her story hasn't changed. She's very specific about what happened. Children's memories can be unreliable after trauma, Carrie said, holding up his bandaged arms. I was burned trying to save her. Why would I hurt someone I love? That's what we're trying to figure out, Detective Townsend said. See, we had a specialist look at Emma's injuries. The burns are very precise, very deliberate, almost like someone was trying to create a specific pattern. Carrie's smile faltered for just a moment. I don't understand what you're suggesting. We're suggesting, Detective Barr said, standing up, that you might want to get yourself a lawyer. We'll be back with a warrant tomorrow. As the detectives left, Carrie felt the first flutter of real concern. Not fear. He didn't do fear, but concern. Maybe it was time to accelerate his timeline. There were ways to make witnesses unreliable, ways to make traumatized children seem delusional. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There were people who owed him favors, people who could help Emma have an accident while she was vulnerable in the hospital. After all, burn victims were fragile things. Carrie Donovan had spent his entire life perfecting the art of surviving, no matter who got hurt in the process. He wasn't about to stop now. Chapter 3. The Call Home. Master Sergeant Blake Willard sat in the belly of a C-130 transport plane 30,000 feet over the Atlantic, surrounded by the hum of engines and the quiet conversations of other soldiers heading home for various reasons. But Blake's mind was somewhere else entirely, in a hospital room in Georgia, where his 7-year-old daughter lay fighting for her life. The past 18 hours had been a blur of emergency flights, paperwork, and phone calls. His commanding officer, Colonel Preston Graves, had pulled strings to get Blake stateside on emergency leave. More importantly, the colonel had made another call, one that Blake had specifically requested. Blake's phone buzzed with an encrypted message. Package delivered. Your friend sends his regards. Dio. Captain Dennis O'Connor had come through. The package was something Blake had hoped never to use. A complete intelligence dossier on Carrie Donovan, compiled by military intelligence specialists. When you had friends in the right places, certain resources became available for personal use. Blake opened the encrypted file on his tablet. What he read made his blood run cold. Carrie James Donovan, age 28. Born in Atlanta, mother unknown, father deceased. 15 different foster homes between ages 5 to 18. 3 incidents of suspected animal abuse in different homes, never prosecuted. 2 allegations of inappropriate contact with younger children in group homes, both recanted by victims after counseling sessions with Donovan present. At 18, Donovan had aged out of the system and promptly disappeared for 3 years. When he resurfaced, it was in Jacksonville, Florida, where he'd worked as a maintenance supervisor at a daycare center. He'd been fired after 6 months when parents complained their children had started having nightmares and didn't want to go to school. No charges filed. The pattern continued across 3 states. Donovan would find work in positions that gave him access to children, stay just long enough to avoid serious scrutiny, then move on when things got uncomfortable. He was smart, careful, and absolutely predatory. 2 years ago, he'd landed in Savannah and met Melanie at a grocery store. The file included surveillance photos from social media. Carrie playing the perfect boyfriend, Carrie at Emma's school events, Carrie slowly isolating Melanie from her friends and family. Blake scrolled through psychological profiles compiled by military behavioral analysts. The assessment was chilling. Subject exhibits classic antisocial personality traits with sadistic tendencies. Extremely intelligent and manipulative. High probability of escalating violent behavior. Recommend extreme caution. Subject will not respond to conventional therapeutic intervention and poses significant ongoing threat. The final page made Blake's hands shake with rage. It was a medical report from Emma's examination, with photographs of her injuries that the hospital had been required to provide to authorities. The burns on her back clearly formed the letter CD. This wasn't an accident or even random violence. It was branding, marking territory like a rancher marks cattle. Blake closed the file and looked out the small window at the clouds below. For 12 years, he'd been a professional soldier, following rules of engagement, respecting due process, working within systems designed to deliver justice. But those systems had already failed Emma once, and Blake wasn't going to let them fail her again. His phone rang. Melanie's number. Blake? Thank God you're coming home. Emma keeps asking for you. How is she? Melanie's voice cracked. She's going to need multiple surgeries. The burns are so deep. The doctors say she'll have scars for life, and that's if everything goes perfectly. What about Carrie? There was a long pause. Blake, I know Emma says he did it, but you don't understand. He was burned too, trying to save her. He loves her. He's been nothing but supportive and... Melanie. Blake's voice cut through her words like a blade. I need you to listen to me very carefully. Get Emma somewhere safe. Away from him. Blake, you're scaring me. Carrie would never. I'm sending you a file. Read it. Tonight. And then get Emma somewhere safe. Blake hung up and immediately forwarded selected portions of Donovan's dossier to Melanie's email. Not the classified material, but enough public records and police reports to paint a clear picture. 2 hours later, his phone rang again. This time, Melanie was crying. Blake, I'm so sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. I brought this monster into our daughter's life. I let him... Oh God, what has he done to her? What else has he done? Where are you now? The hospital. I haven't left Emma's side. Blake, the police are investigating, but his story is so convincing, and he has those burns on his arms. Self-inflicted, Blake said. Classic misdirection. Melanie, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. First, don't go home. Not until this is over. Second, don't let Emma out of your sight, and don't let hospital staff you don't know have access to her alone. What are you saying? I'm saying Carrie Donovan is a predator who's spent his entire adult life perfecting his craft. He's not going to just accept defeat and disappear. He's going to try to silence Emma. The silence on the line stretched for nearly a minute. Blake, what are you going to do? Blake looked around the cargo hold at his fellow soldiers. Men and women who'd sworn an oath to protect the innocent, to defend freedom, to stand against evil wherever they found it. The uniform came with rules, regulations, codes of conduct. But fatherhood came with something simpler and more fundamental. I'm going to do what should have been done a long time ago, Blake said. I'm going to protect my daughter. The law failed her already. Melanie, in 18 hours I'll be stateside. Keep Emma safe until then. After that, Carrie Donovan becomes my problem to solve. As the plane began its descent into Andrews Air Force Base, Blake made another encrypted call. Colonel, it's Willard. I need to cash in some favors. Blake, you're on emergency leave. Whatever you're thinking. Sir, with respect, I'm not thinking like a soldier right now. I'm thinking like a father. And fathers don't follow rules of engagement when someone brands their children like cattle. Colonel Graves was quiet for a long moment. What do you need? Access to our friends at Quantico, the behavioral analysis unit. and maybe a conversation with some of the boys from JSOC who specialize in making problems disappear permanently. Blake, sir, I've served 12 years without a single black mark on my record. I've never asked for anything beyond standard benefits. I'm asking now. Another long pause. The behavioral unit can provide consulting on threat assessment. Anything else is off the books and never happened. Understood, sir. Thank you. As the plane touched down, Blake Willard was already transforming from Master Sergeant Blake Willard, professional soldier, into something more primal and infinitely more dangerous. A father whose child had been hurt, with the skills and resources to do something about it. Carrie Donovan had made the mistake of marking Blake's daughter as his property. Now Blake was coming home to show him the difference between a brand and an obituary. Chapter 4. Homecoming. The Savannah Regional Medical Center's pediatric burn unit smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation. Blake Willard walked through the sterile corridors in civilian clothes, jeans, boots, and a simple black t-shirt that couldn't disguise the military bearing in his shoulders or the cold purpose in his steel-gray eyes. Emma was sleeping when he entered room 314. Blake's knees nearly buckled to the sight of his daughter, so small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors and 4 lines. Her back was heavily bandaged, and her face, turned toward the window, showed the exhausted peace of medicated sleep. Melanie sat in the chair beside the bed, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past week. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her scrubs were wrinkled from sleeping in the chair. She looked up when Blake entered, and her relief was palpable. "She's been asking for you every hour," Melanie whispered. "The doctors say she's stable, but Blake, the burns." Her voice broke. Blake pulled up a chair on the other side of Emma's bed and took his daughter's small hand in his. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." For the next hour, Melanie recounted the past 6 months with Carrie Donovan, how he'd slowly inserted himself into their lives, how he'd isolated her from friends, how he'd been so good with Emma initially. As she talked, Blake noticed things, how Melanie flinched at sudden sounds, how she kept checking the door, how she'd positioned herself between Emma and the entrance. There were signs, Melanie said, tears streaming down her face. Little things. Emma started having nightmares 3 months ago. She'd wet the bed, which she hadn't done since she was 4. She didn't want to be alone with him, but he always had explanations. She was jealous of our relationship. She was acting out because of the divorce. She missed you. Did he ever leave marks before? Melanie nodded miserably. A few bruises. He always had explanations. She fell. She ran into something. She was clumsy. And he was so convincing, so concerned. He'd buy her toys afterward, take us out for ice cream. Blake squeezed Emma's hand gently. "What about the day it happened?" "I had to work a double shift. Carrie said he'd watch Emma, make her dinner, help with homework. Well, I got the call from the hospital." Melanie sobbed. "Blake, I brought this monster into her life. I failed her." "No," Blake said quietly. "A predator failed her. The system failed her. You were trying to build a life for Emma. That's not failure." Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw Blake, her face transformed with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. "Daddy, you came home." Blake leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I promised I would, didn't I? How are you feeling, sweetheart?" "It hurts, Daddy. It hurts really bad. Are you going to make Carrie go away?" Blake looked into his daughter's eyes. His eyes, steel gray and stronger than any 7-year-old should have to be. "Yes, baby girl. Daddy's going to make sure he never hurts you again." Emma nodded and closed her eyes again, exhausted by even that brief conversation. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Dennis O'Connor. "Your consultation is ready. Conference room B, 3rd floor, 1 hour." Blake kissed Emma's forehead again and stood up. "I need to step out for a bit." "Don't leave her side." "Where are you going?" "To get some professional opinions." Conference room B turned out to be a small meeting room the hospital used for family consultations. Blake found 3 people waiting for him. Dennis O'Connor, now a captain in Army intelligence, Dr. Martha Hinton, an FBI behavioral analyst, and someone Blake didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and calloused hands. "Blake, Meet Dr. Hinton from Quantico and Josephine Root, Dennis said. Josephine is freelance consulting. Blake shook hands with both women. Dr. Hinton's grip was firm and professional. Josephine Root's handshake spoke of violence held in careful control. Mr. Willard, Dr. Hinton began, opening a file folder. I've reviewed the materials Captain O'Connor provided, as well as the hospital records and police reports. I need to be very clear about something. Carrie Donovan is not going to stop. This escalation pattern, combined with his psychological profile, indicates he sees your daughter as his property now. He's marked her. In his mind, that makes her his permanently. What does that mean practically? It means he'll try to finish what he started, Josephine Root said. Her voice was flat, matter of fact. Men like Donovan don't leave loose ends. Your daughter can identify him, describe what happened in detail. She's a threat to his freedom. Blake felt ice in his veins. You think he'll try to hurt her again? I think he'll try to kill her, Dr. Hinton said bluntly. Probably within the next 72 hours, while she's vulnerable in the hospital. He's had time to plan, and desperation makes predators unpredictable. Dennis leaned forward. Blake, I've had people watching Donovan since you called. He's been asking questions about hospital security, visiting hours, staff schedules. He's also made contact with some very unsavory people, the kind who solve problems for money. What kind of people? The kind who can make a critically injured child's condition take a sudden turn for the worse, Josephine said. Medical equipment failures, drug interactions, unfortunate accidents. Blake was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of a professional soldier planning an operation. What are my options? Legally, Dr. Hinton said. The police investigation is ongoing, but proving what actually happened is difficult. It's a child's word against an adult with a plausible cover story and physical evidence supporting his version. Even with his background, prosecution is uncertain. Practically, Blake asked, looking at Josephine. Carrie Donovan needs to disappear permanently, she said. Not killed. That brings too much attention. Disappeared. Relocated to somewhere he can't hurt anyone else, can't come back, can't be a threat. I thought you were going to say something else. Josephine smiled for the first time since Blake had met her. Mr. Willard, I've seen your military record. You're not a killer by nature. You're a protector. There are ways to neutralize threats without becoming them. Dennis slid a manila envelope across the table. Blake, there are people who specialize in making problems go away quietly. People who work outside official channels, but with unofficial approval. Josephine has contacts. Blake opened the envelope and found photographs, addresses, and detailed intelligence on Carrie Donovan's current activities. There's also a business card with only a phone number. What happens if I make this call? Carrie Donovan gets offered an opportunity to start fresh somewhere far away, with enough money to live comfortably, on the condition that he never returns to Georgia and never contact your family again. Josephine explained. Most men take that deal. And if he doesn't, Josephine's smile turned cold. Then he discovers that the world is full of dangerous places for people who hurt children. Blake pocketed the envelope and business card. How long do I have? To decide? Tonight, Dennis said. To act if he refuses relocation? Maybe 48 hours before he makes his move on Emma. Blake stood up and shook hands with all three. Thank you. All of you. As he walked back toward Emma's room, Blake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard you were in town. Would love to catch up. Coffee tomorrow? CD. Carrie Donovan was making his opening move. Blake smiled grimly and typed back, looking forward to it. The hunt was beginning. Chapter 5. The Predator's Move. Carrie Donovan sat in the back corner booth of Maggie's Diner on Highway 80, wearing his practice mask of concerned stepfather. He'd chosen the location carefully, public enough to seem innocent, isolated enough for private conversation. At 10 a.m. on a Tuesday, only truckers and retirees populated the restaurant. He'd spent the past 2 days carefully planning this meeting with Blake Willard, the returning war hero, the absent father, the man who'd abandoned his family for foreign adventures. Carrie had crafted a narrative that painted himself as Emma's protector, the stable male figure who'd stepped up when Blake had chosen duty over daughter. But as Blake Willard walked through the diner's front door, Carrie felt his first moment of genuine uncertainty. Blake moved like violence contained in human form. Every step was measured, controlled, purposeful. His gray eyes swept the room with tactical precision before settling on Carrie with an intensity that made the predator want to look away. This wasn't the soft suburban father Carrie had expected. Blake slid into the booth across from him without offering a handshake or pleasantries. "Donovan. Blake, right? I've heard so much about you from Emma and Melanie." Carrie deployed his warmest smile. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Blake's expression didn't change. "Tell me what happened." "It was horrible," Carrie began, his voice carefully modulated with just the right amount of trauma and concern. "Emma was playing near the fireplace while I was making dinner. I heard her scream and found her on the floor, burned by the poker. I tried to grab it away from her and got burned myself. She must have pulled it down accidentally." Blake listened without interruption, his hands folded on the table. When Carrie finished, Blake was quiet for nearly 30 seconds. "That's your story?" "It's not a story, Blake. It's what happened. I know Emma is saying otherwise, but she's traumatized. Children's memories are remarkably accurate when it comes to significant trauma," Blake interrupted, "especially when the trauma is repeated." Carrie felt a flicker of his mask slipping. "I don't know what you're implying." Blake reached into his jacket and placed several photographs on the table. Carrie's breath caught. There were surveillance photos of him outside Emma's school, at the playground, following children in different locations across multiple states. "Where did you get these? Does it matter?" Blake's voice was conversational, but his eyes remained ice cold. "What matters is what they show. A pattern. Jacksonville, Florida. Macon, Georgia. Birmingham, Alabama. Always the same. You find vulnerable families, insert yourself, gain access to children, then move on when things get complicated." Carrie's mind raced. Who the hell was Blake Willard connected to that he could get this kind of intelligence? The photographs were professional-grade surveillance, the kind that required resources and expertise. "I don't know what game you're playing, but..." Blake placed another photograph on the table. This one made Carrie's blood run cold. It was from 3 nights ago, showing Carrie meeting with Maurice Morrow, a man who specialized in making problems disappear for the right price. "You hired Morrow to kill my daughter," Blake said. It wasn't a question. Carrie's mask finally cracked completely. The concerned stepfather disappeared, replaced by something much darker. "Prove it." "I don't need to prove anything. I'm not a cop or a prosecutor. I'm a father whose daughter was branded like cattle by a fucking predator." The violence in Blake's voice made several other diners look over. Carrie glanced around nervously, then leaned forward. "What do you want?" Blake slid a business card across the table. "Just a phone number. You have 2 choices. Call that number. Tell them Blake Willard sent you. They'll relocate you somewhere far from here with enough money to start over, on the condition that you never return to Georgia and never contact my family again." And the second choice. Blake's smile was utterly without warmth. "You don't take the first choice, and I show you the difference between a brand and an obituary." Carrie stared at the business card, his mind calculating odds. Blake Willard was clearly connected to people with serious resources, intelligence gathering, surveillance, witness relocation. But Carrie had survived worse situations by being smarter and more ruthless than his opponents. And if I refuse both choices, then Maurice Morrow is going to have a very bad accident tonight, Blake said. And tomorrow, every law enforcement agency in 3 states is going to receive detailed files about your activities over the past decade. Photos, witness statements, medical records of children in your care. Your face will be on every news broadcast as a suspected serial child predator. Carrie felt the walls closing in. Blake had outmaneuvered him completely, built a trap with no good exits. But Carrie hadn't survived 23 years by accepting defeat gracefully. "You're bluffing. You don't have the connections to." Blake's phone buzzed. He answered without looking away from Carrie. "Yes." A voice on the other end was loud enough for Carrie to hear. "Package delivered. Target neutralized. No complications." Blake hung up. Maurice Morrow just had a heart attack in his apartment. Very sudden, very fatal. Probably all that cocaine in his system. Carrie's face went white. Blake was serious, deadly serious. And he had resources that could reach out and touch anyone, anywhere. You have until midnight tomorrow to make your decision, Blake continued. After that, your options become significantly more limited. Blake stood up and dropped a 20 on the table for coffee neither of them had touched. Oh, and Carrie? If anything happens to Emma, if she has so much as a bad dream while I'm in town, I'm going to assume you chose option 2. And I'm going to get very creative about that obituary. As Blake walked away, Carrie sat in the booth, staring at the business card. For the first time in his adult life, he was genuinely afraid. Not of consequences or imprisonment. He'd always been able to manipulate his way out of official trouble. He was afraid of Blake Willard, who moved and spoke like death itself. But fear had always made Carrie more dangerous, not less. Blake Willard thought he could intimidate a predator into submission. He was about to learn that cornered animals were the most vicious of all. Carrie pocketed the business card and pulled out his own phone. If Blake wanted to play with military resources and Black Ops connections, Carrie would remind him that monsters didn't always come in uniform. He dialed a number he'd memorized, but hoped never to use. "It's me," he said when the call connected. "I need a call in that favor." All of it. The game was far from over. Chapter 6, The Trap. Blake returned to the hospital to find Emma awake and asking for ice cream. Her small request, so normal, so beautifully mundane, nearly broke his heart. He'd spent the morning planning violence while his daughter wanted nothing more than chocolate chip cookie dough in a plastic hospital cup. "The doctor says I can have some if I eat my lunch first," Emma said, showing him the untouched turkey sandwich on her tray. Blake sat beside her bed and helped her eat, cutting the sandwich into small pieces. Each bite was a struggle for Emma. The pain medication made her nauseous, and the trauma had stolen her appetite. But she persevered, motivated by the promise of ice cream and her father's presence. "Daddy, is Carrie going away?" Blake met his daughter's eyes. "Yes, sweetheart. One way or another, he's going away." "Good. He's mean, Daddy. Really mean. He hurt the neighbor's cat too, but nobody believed me." Blake's jaw tightened. Another victim, another crime that had gone unnoticed. "What happened to the cat?" "He said it was an accident, but I saw him throw it against the wall." "Mr. Henderson's cat, Whiskers. Carrie said if I told anyone, he'd do the same thing to me." Blake pulled out his phone and made note. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence could be useful. But as he typed, he noticed movement in the hallway. A man in hospital scrubs walking past Emma's room for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Blake excused himself and stepped into the corridor. The man was gone, but Blake's instincts were screaming. He found a charge nurse at the station. The male nurse who was just here, tall, dark hair, blue scrubs. "What's his name?" The charge nurse looked puzzled. "Sir, we don't have any male nurses on this shift. Only female staff in this unit today." Blake's blood went cold. He pulled out his phone and called Dennis O'Connor while jogging back toward Emma's room. "Dennis, I need security at the hospital. Now." Donovan's making his move. Blake reached Emma's room to find Melanie talking to a hospital administrator, a woman in a business suit with a concerned expression. "Mr. Willard? I'm Dr. Clara Levy, hospital administrator. I need to speak with you about your daughter's security situation." Blake's hand instinctively moved toward where his sidearm would normally be. "What about it?" "We've had some irregularities today. Someone tried to access Emma's medical records from an external terminal. We've also had reports of unauthorized personnel in this ward. Given the circumstances of her injury, we think it's best to transfer Emma to a more secure facility." Something felt wrong. Blake studied Dr. Levy's face, noting the slight nervous tick in her left eye, the way she positioned herself between him and Emma's bed. "Which facility?" "St. Joseph's has an excellent burn unit with enhanced security protocols. We can have her transferred within the hour." Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Dennis. "No Dr. Clara Levy on hospital staff. Get out now." Blake moved like lightning. In one fluid motion, he stepped past the fake administrator and positioned himself between her and Emma's bed. "Melanie, take Emma to the bathroom." "Now." "Blake, what?" "Now, Melanie." Melanie scooped Emma up despite the child's protests about her foreline. As they disappeared into the small bathroom, Blake faced the woman claiming to be Dr. Levy. "Who sent you?" The woman's concerned expression melted away, replaced by cold professionalism. "Mr. Willard, you're interfering with a legal transfer order. Show me the paperwork." She reached into her briefcase, but instead of documents, she pulled out a syringe. Blake grabbed her wrist as she lunged toward him, twisting until she dropped the syringe. It hit the floor and shattered, spilling clear liquid across the tile. "Potassium chloride," she said calmly as Blake forced her against the wall. Completely undetectable in a child already receiving multiple four medications. Heart failure in burn victims is unfortunately common. Blake's grip tightened. "Who sent you?" "Someone who pays better than the military," she said. "Nothing personal, Mr. Willard. Just business." Blake heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy boots, multiple people. Hospital security would wear soft-soled shoes. These were tactical boots. "Melanie," Blake called out. "Stay in the bathroom. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." The fake Dr. Levy smiled. "You can't protect her forever. There are 4 of us, one of you, and nowhere to run." Blake looked around the hospital room, calculating angles and improvised weapons. The 4-stand was aluminum, light but sturdy. The bathroom door was solid wood, defensible. The window was 3rd floor, too high to jump with Emma. "You made one mistake," Blake told the woman. "What's that?" Blake released her wrist and stepped back. "You assumed I came alone." The lights in the corridor went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a second later, bathing everything in red. Blake heard suppressed gunfire and shouted commands in the hallway. Professional soldiers moving with lethal efficiency. The fake Dr. Levy reached for a backup weapon, but Blake was faster. The 4-stand caught her across the temple, dropping her unconscious to the floor. Dennis O'Connor appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "Hospital secure. We got all 4. Emma and Melanie are in the bathroom." Blake knocked on the door. "It's Daddy. It's safe now." Melanie emerged carrying Emma, both of them shaken but unharmed. Emma looked at the unconscious woman on the floor, then up at her father. "Was she going to hurt me too, Daddy?" Blake knelt beside his daughter. "She was going to try, sweetheart. But Daddy didn't let her." Dennis was examining the broken syringe with a field test kit. Potassium chloride, like she said. This would have killed Emma in minutes. Blake stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. "Where's Donovan?" "That's the thing," Dennis said. "He's gone. Disappeared about 2 hours ago. Cleaned out his bank accounts, ditched his car completely off the grid." Blake looked down at the unconscious assassin. Carrie Donovan had refused the easy exit, instead choosing to escalate to attempted murder. Now he was running, but Blake knew men like Donovan. They didn't run far, and they didn't stay gone. They circled back to finish what they started. "Dennis, I need Emma and Melanie somewhere absolutely secure. Military safe house, not civilian witness protection. Already arranged. They'll be at Fort Stewart within the hour, guarded by people I trust personally." Blake kissed Emma's forehead. "Daddy has to go take care of something, but you'll be safe. I promise. Are you going to find Carrie?" Blake looked into his daughter's eyes, still so trusting despite everything she'd endured. "Yes, baby girl. And when I do, he'll never be able to hurt anyone ever again." As Dennis escorted Melanie and Emma toward the secure transport, Blake pulled out the business card Josephine Root had given him. But instead of the relocation number, he dialed a different one, a number Dennis had provided for situations that required permanent solutions. "It's Blake Willard," he said when the call connected. "Carrie Donovan just forfeited his right to relocation. I'm calling in that favor now." "Understood. What are your parameters?" Blake looked around the hospital room where someone had just tried to murder his daughter. "No parameters. Whatever it takes. I want him found, and I want him to understand exactly why this is happening to him." "Copy that. We'll be in touch." Blake hung up and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, Carrie Donovan was running, probably thinking he'd won by forcing Blake's family into hiding. He was about to learn that predators weren't the only ones who could hunt. The difference was when Blake Willard hunted something, it stayed dead. Chapter 7, The Hunt. Carrie Donovan had been running for 36 hours, and paranoia was eating him alive. Every shadow could hide an assassin, Every stranger could be military intelligence. Every phone call could be his last. He'd burned through 3 stolen identities and 4 different vehicles since fleeing Savannah, constantly moving, never sleeping in the same place twice. Currently, he was holed up in a flea-bag motel outside Atlanta, paying cash and avoiding cameras. But he knew he couldn't run forever. Blake Willard had resources Carey couldn't match, connections he couldn't break, and the kind of focused patience that came from professional military training. The failed hospital operation had been Carey's last play with hired help. The woman he'd paid to kill Emma, a freelance operative who'd worked with Maurice Morrow, had been captured. The 3-man backup team had been eliminated with surgical precision. Carey was now completely on his own, with every law enforcement agency in the region looking for him. But Carey Donovan hadn't survived 28 years by accepting defeat. If Blake Willard wanted to play hunter, Carey would remind him that predators were most dangerous when cornered. Carey pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number from memory. "Melanie? Thank God you answered." "Carey." Melanie's voice was sharp with fear and anger. "Where are you? The police are looking for you. They said you tried to." "Melanie, listen to me. Blake has poisoned your mind against me. I never hurt Emma. I love her like my own daughter. But Blake is dangerous. He's using his military connections to frame me for something I didn't do." "Carey, I saw the files. Your history, the other children, fabricated. All of it. Blake has friends in intelligence who can create false documents, plant evidence, make lies look like truth. He's trying to destroy me because he can't stand that Emma loves me more than him." Carey could hear Melanie's uncertainty. She'd always been vulnerable to manipulation, desperate to believe the best in people. He pressed his advantage. "Where are you now? Are you safe?" We're in a secure location. Military safe house," Carey said, making it sound like a prison. "Melanie, he's isolating you, controlling you. Soon he'll convince you that Emma is lying about the accident, that I'm some kind of monster. Then he'll disappear again on another deployment, leaving you both trapped in his web of lies." "Carey, the doctors said Emma's burns were deliberate. They form letters." "CD," Carey said quietly. "I know what they think they see, but trauma can make people see patterns that aren't there. Emma was burned accidentally, and now Blake is using her confusion to justify destroying my life." Melanie was quiet for a long moment. Carey could almost hear the doubt creeping in, the questions about Blake's sudden appearance with military resources and violent solutions. "Where are you?" she asked finally. "Safe. For now. But Melanie, Blake has people hunting me. Not to arrest me, to kill me. I have information that could end his career, expose his connections to illegal operations. He can't let me live." It was a masterful lie, built on just enough truth to be believable. Blake did have military connections. He was involved in operations outside normal channels. And Carey was running for his life. "What do you want me to do?" "Meet me. Tomorrow night. Just you. I have evidence that will prove Blake is behind this. Documents that show how he manufactured evidence against me." "I can't leave Emma." "Bring her," Carey said. "She needs to hear the truth. She needs to understand that the man she thinks is protecting her is actually the one putting her in danger." Another long pause. "Where?" Carey smiled for the first time in days. Melanie was still vulnerable to his manipulation. "The old Riverside Park, where we had our first date. Tomorrow at sunset. Come alone. If Blake finds out, he'll stop you from learning the truth." After Melanie hung up, Carey allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Blake Willard thought he was hunting a prey animal, something that would run until cornered and then surrender. Instead, he was about to walk into a trap that would cost him everything he cared about. Carey had spent the past day preparing. The park was isolated, with multiple escape routes and clear sight lines. More importantly, it was the perfect place for what came next, a final confrontation that would end with Blake watching his family die, knowing it was his own arrogance that had killed them. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, Blake Willard sat in a secure communications center at Fort Stewart, studying satellite feeds and electronic intercepts. His phone calls were being monitored, his location tracked, his every move cataloged by intelligence assets that made the FBI look like amateur hour. "We have him," Josephine Root said, entering the room with a tablet full of data. Motel in Atlanta. Paid cash, but he made a credit card purchase at a gas station 6 blocks away. Facial recognition confirmed. Blake studied the tactical display. He's too smart to stay there. This is misdirection. Agreed. But we traced the burner phone he used to call your ex-wife. Tower triangulation puts him within a 15-mile radius. Blake's blood went cold. He called Melanie 20 minutes ago. We have the recording. Blake listened to Carrie's masterful manipulation, how he twisted truth and lies into a narrative that painted Blake as the real villain. By the end of the recording, Blake could see how Melanie might believe it, how a desperate woman might grasp at any explanation that didn't make her complicit in her daughter's torture. She's going to meet him, Blake said. It wasn't a question. Our psychological profile says 90% probability. He knows exactly which emotional buttons to push. Blake stood up and began strapping on tactical gear. Where? Unknown. But we're monitoring all communications from the safe house. The moment she makes a move, we'll know. No, Blake said. By then it'll be too late. Donovan isn't planning to run anymore. He's planning to end this. Blake's phone buzzed with a secure message from Dennis O'Connor. Melanie requested permission to leave safe house. Says she has evidence that could clear Donovan. Orders. Blake closed his eyes and saw his daughter's face, marked forever by a predator's brand. When he opened them, his expression was pure predator. Tell Dennis to let her go, Blake said, but I want full surveillance. The moment Donovan shows himself, I want to know. Josephine looked surprised. You're using your ex-wife and daughter as bait? No, Blake said, checking his sidearm and holstering it. I'm giving Carrie Donovan exactly what he wants, a chance to finish what he started. But he's not going to like how it ends. Blake walked toward the exit, then paused. Josephine, when this is over, there won't be a body to find. Are you prepared for that kind of cleanup? Josephine's smile was sharp as a blade. Mr. Willard, making people disappear permanently is what I do best. Carrie Donovan hurt a child under our protection. As far as I'm concerned, he stopped being human the moment he branded your daughter. Blake nodded and headed for his vehicle. Carrie Donovan wanted to show him the difference between a hunter and prey. Blake was about to teach him the difference between a predator and an apex predator. The final confrontation was 12 hours away. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Riverside Park at sunset was a place of childhood memories. The playground where Blake had pushed Emma on swings, the pavilion where he and Melanie had shared their first kiss years ago. Now it felt like a battlefield, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a possible ambush. Blake arrived 2 hours early, moving through the wooded areas with practiced stealth. His earpiece crackled with updates from the surveillance team Dennis had positioned around the park's perimeter. Overwatch 1, 2 vehicles approaching from the east. Melanie's car and 1 unknown. Copy. Any sign of primary target? Negative. But thermal imaging shows movement in the tree line, northwest quadrant. Blake smiled grimly. Carrie was already in position, probably had been for hours. This wasn't going to be a simple meeting. It was an ambush carefully planned and executed. But Blake had been expecting that. Through his scope, Blake watched Melanie's car pull into the parking area. She got out alone, looking around nervously. No Emma, thank God. Whatever else Melanie might believe about Blake, she wasn't reckless enough to bring their injured daughter to a clandestine meeting. Where's Emma? Carrie's voice carried across the park as he emerged from the woods. He'd positioned himself with clear sight lines and multiple escape routes, just as Blake had anticipated. Safe, Melanie replied. Carrie, I need to know the truth. Did you hurt her? Carrie approached slowly, hands visible, but Blake could see the bulge of a concealed weapon under his jacket. Melanie, everything I told you is true. Blake has been manipulating evidence, using his military contacts to frame me. Blake watched through his scope as Carrie moved closer to Melanie, noting how the predator positioned himself between her and the parking lot, cutting off escape routes, controlling the situation. Classic predator behavior. I brought something to show you, Carrie continued, pulling out a manila envelope. Documents that prove Blake planted evidence against me. But we need to move quickly. His people are probably tracking your phone. Melanie, step away from him. Blake's voice echoed across the park as he emerged from concealment, rifle trained on Carrie's center mass. Now, Carrie smiled, not surprised at all by Blake's appearance. Right on time, Sergeant. Although I noticed you came alone. I didn't need backup for this. No. Carrie pulled Melanie against him, a knife suddenly appearing at her throat. What about now? Blake's scope never wavered from Carrie's head. Let her go. This is between you and me. Is it? Carrie's voice carried an edge of madness. You destroyed my life, Blake. Cost me everything. Now you get to watch yours burn. Your life was destroyed the moment you decided to torture children, Blake replied calmly. I just helped speed up the process. Carrie pressed the knife deeper against Melanie's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put down your weapon and walk away. I'm going to take Melanie somewhere private, and you're going to live with knowing you could have saved her. Blake's finger remained steady on the trigger. Counteroffer. I put a bullet through your brainstem, and Melanie goes home to her daughter. You won't risk hitting her. At this range? With this rifle? You're betting your life I'll miss. For the first time, Carrie looked genuinely uncertain. Blake was too calm, too confident. Professional snipers didn't make idle threats. You know what I think? Blake continued conversationally. I think you're scared. I think for the first time in your miserable life, you're facing someone you can't manipulate, can't intimidate, can't control. How does it feel to be the prey animal, Carrie? Shut up, Carrie snarled, but Blake could see sweat beading on the predator's forehead. You branded my daughter like she was cattle, Blake said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the park. You marked her as your property. Now I'm going to mark you as mine. Blake's radio crackled. Overwatch 2. I have a clear shot on the target. Negative, Blake replied without taking his eyes off Carrie. This one's mine. But Carrie had heard the radio traffic. His eyes darted toward the tree line, searching for additional threats. In that moment of distraction, Melanie broke free, stumbling away from her captor. Run, Melanie. Get to the car. Carrie spun toward Blake, knife raised, but Blake was already moving. The rifle shot echoed across the park, and Carrie Donovan dropped like a marionette with cut strings, the knife spinning away harmlessly. Blake approached the fallen predator carefully. Carrie was still alive, the bullet having shattered his shoulder instead of killing him instantly. Blake knelt beside him, close enough to see the fear in Carrie's eyes. Why? Carrie gasped. You had me. You could have killed me clean. Blake's smile was colder than winter. Because dying isn't your punishment, Carrie. Living is. Blake pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. Do you know what this is? It's a cocktail designed by some very creative people. It won't kill you, but it will ensure you spend the rest of your life in a very special kind of hell. Carrie's eyes widened as Blake injected the contents into his bloodstream. What did you do to me? Gave you exactly what you gave my daughter, a permanent mark. In about 30 seconds, you're going to lose the ability to speak clearly. In 5 minutes, you'll lose most fine motor control. In an hour, you'll be completely dependent on others for basic functions. Blake stood up as Carrie began convulsing. But here's the beautiful part. Your mind stays completely intact. You'll be aware of everything happening to you, but unable to communicate, unable to control your own body. You can't. Carrie's words were already slurring. Can't what? Can't leave you in the care of the Georgia State Hospital for the criminally insane, where they treat patients with severe neurological damage. Can't ensure you're assigned to a ward staffed by people who know exactly what you did to children. Blake began walking away as sirens approached in the distance. Don't worry, Carrie. They'll take very good care of you for the rest of your very long life. As Blake reached Melanie, she looked back at Carrie's convulsing form. Is he? He's alive. He'll stay alive for decades. Completely helpless, completely aware, completely at the mercy of people who know what he is. Blake guided Melanie toward the parking area. Sometimes death is too kind of punishment. 3 days later, Blake sat beside Emma's hospital bed, reading her a story about brave princesses and defeated dragons. Her back was healing well, the doctors said, though the scars would be permanent. But Emma seemed remarkably resilient, more interested in her father's stories than in dwelling on her trauma. Daddy, what happened to Carrie? Blake looked into his daughter's eyes, still pure, still trusting, still his. Carrie got sick, sweetheart. Very sick. He won't be able to hurt anyone ever again. Good, Emma said simply, then returned her attention to the story. Blake's phone buzzed with a message from Josephine Root. Package delivered to long-term care facility. Medical records indicate severe neurological trauma from unknown toxin exposure. Patient conscious but unresponsive to treatment. Prognosis: permanent incapacitation. Justice served. Blake deleted the message and continued reading to his daughter. Outside the hospital window, Savannah went about its daily business, unaware that a monster had been permanently removed from their midst. For Blake Willard, Master Sergeant and father, that was justice enough. Chapter 9. After the storm. 6 months later, Blake Willard stood in the backyard of a small house in Savannah, watching Emma play on the swing set he'd built for her. The scars on her back had faded to thin white lines, barely visible beneath the bright yellow sundress Melanie had picked out for her 8th birthday. Emma was laughing, a sound Blake had feared he might never hear again. She was chasing butterflies around the garden, her movements unrestricted despite the doctor's early concerns about nerve damage. Children, Blake had learned, were remarkably resilient creatures. She looks happy, Melanie said, joining Blake on the back porch. She carried 2 glasses of iced tea, setting one down on the railing beside him. She is happy, Blake replied. Kids adapt better than adults. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Emma discover a ladybug on one of Melanie's roses. The past 6 months had been a journey of healing for all of them. Blake had taken early retirement from the Army, using his security clearance and specialized skills to start a private consulting firm that kept him local. The work was less exotic than special operations, but infinitely more valuable. He was home every night for dinner, available for school events, present for the bedtime stories that Emma loved. Melanie had needed longer to heal. The guilt of bringing Carrie Donovan into their lives had nearly consumed her in those first weeks. She'd blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not protecting Emma, for being manipulated by a predator. Blake had been patient, understanding that trust, once broken, required time to rebuild. Any word on? Melanie's question trailed off. She still couldn't speak Carrie's name aloud. He's still at the state facility, still responsive to basic stimuli, but unable to communicate or care for himself. The doctors say his condition is permanent. Melanie nodded, her expression complex. Blake knew she struggled with the knowledge of what had really happened to Carrie Donovan. The official story was that he'd suffered a severe neurological event while fleeing arrest, a stroke or seizure brought on by stress and drug use. But Melanie was smart enough to read between the lines, to understand that Blake had engineered a fate worse than death for the man who'd tortured their daughter. "Do you ever feel guilty about it?" she asked quietly. Blake considered the question seriously. "No. Emma sleeps peacefully every night because she knows he can never hurt her again. She's not afraid of strangers, not afraid to be alone with men, not traumatized beyond healing. If I had killed him, she might have felt responsible somehow. This way, he simply disappeared from her world." Blake took a sip of his iced tea and continued. "Besides, there are 23 children across 4 states who are safer because Carrie Donovan can never hurt another child. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about prevention." Emma ran up to the porch, her cheeks flushed with exertion and joy. "Daddy, look what I found." She held up a smooth river stone, painted bright blue by some previous child. "That's beautiful, sweetheart. Where did you find it?" "Under the big oak tree. I think it's magic, like the stones in the fairy tales you read me." Blake knelt down to Emma's level, examining the stone with appropriate seriousness. "Magic stones are very special. What kind of magic do you think this one has?" Emma considered this with 8-year-old gravity. "I think it makes bad dreams go away. And maybe it helps daddies stay home instead of going to war." Blake's throat tightened with emotion. "I think you're right about both of those things." Emma beamed and ran back toward the garden, clutching her magic stone. Blake stood up to find Melanie watching him with an expression he hadn't seen in years, complete trust and something that might have been love. "She's not the only one who's healed," Melanie said softly. Before Blake could respond, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Dennis O'Connor's number. "Blake, sorry to bother you at home, but we've got a situation. Missing child case in Jacksonville. 8-year-old girl disappeared from her school playground. Local authorities are stumped, but the MO matches some cases from your old files." Blake looked at Emma, safe in their backyard, then at Melanie, who nodded understanding. "I'll be there in 4 hours," Blake said. "Send me everything you have." He hung up and kissed Melanie on the cheek. "Consultation work. I should be back by tomorrow night." "Be careful," Melanie said. "Some monsters bite back." Blake smiled and touched the concealed carry pistol on his hip, a habit he'd developed since retiring from active duty. "Let them try." As Blake drove toward Jacksonville 2 hours later, he reflected on how his life had changed. He was no longer Master Sergeant Blake Willard, professional soldier following orders and rules of engagement. He was something new, a private operator who specialized in cases involving endangered children, with the skills and connections to go places law enforcement couldn't. His phone buzzed with a secure message from Josephine Root. "Heard you're back in business. If you need resources for the Jacksonville case, you know how to reach me." Blake smiled and typed back, "Roger that." Some hunts are worth coming out of retirement for. The sun was setting behind him as Blake drove toward another missing child, another predator, another family that needed justice. Emma was safe at home with her mother, playing with magic stones and chasing butterflies. That was worth everything. Worth leaving the military, worth the nightmares, worth becoming something harder and more dangerous than he'd ever been as a soldier. In his rearview mirror, Blake could see Savannah disappearing into the distance. But ahead, somewhere in Jacksonville, a child was in danger. And Blake Willard, father, protector, hunter of monsters, was coming to bring her home. Some brands marked property, others marked purpose. Blake knew exactly which kind he carried.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.